Hello YouTube, this is Goddard Radio Moscow here again with another beer review. Now in my previous video I did the Weihenstephan tradition, and this was a bit of a last minute choice because I found out that it was German Unity Day, so I decided it would be cool to do a German beer for that particular video. But the American craft beer I mentioned in that video I have for you today. This is the Minhas Brewery Huber Bock. Now this brewery has a very interesting history, and it's been shaped by various immigrants to the US of various different European nationalities. So I'll just take you through the history of that beer, but if you're only interested in the particular taste in this beer, then just fast forward the video to a few minutes before the end, and I'll take those of you who want to stay for the history through that just now. Now the brewery was founded in Monroe, Wisconsin in 1845 under the name Monroe Brewing Company by a Mr. Bissinger, who was a Swiss immigrant to the United States, but then it was bought by John M. Knipschild in 1848, who was originally Prussian, Prussia being the most, is now the most northern part of Poland, going along the Baltic coast there. But yeah, he was Prussian, and he'd been living in Illinois, becoming a US citizen in 1841. But during his tenure at the brewery, it was hand-powered and had only 2 employees, and was producing 366 barrels of beer per year. Now the brewery again changed hands in 1857, going into the ownership of George Esser and John Herman. Now in 1858 they built an underground beer storage cellar and brewed the first lager beers at the brewery. The brewery had only actually produced ales before that time. Now interestingly, the brewing only actually took place in winter as well, but by 1861 John Herman had become the sole owner of the brewery despite being the minority partner, and it remained in his hands until 1867, when it was bought for 2 years by Captain Edward Ruger, who was from Le Havre in France, but he was Swiss by origin, and he, interestingly enough, served as the fire chief and sheriff for the city of Monroe. Now between 1868 and 1892 the brewery was owned by Jacob Heft, who was a Swiss immigrant to the States as well, and he apparently was the first citizen in his home village in the US to learn English. But during his tenure the beer was distributed under the Monroe label, and the brewery was destroyed during a fire in 1875. Now at this point his brother-in-law Adam Bloomer Sr., who was a Swiss native from a farming family in the local area, he joined him as a 50% partner in the brewery in 1885 after the original brother had tried to rebuild it. But he became the sole owner of the brewery in 1892, and he modernised the brewery during his tenure and changed the name of the brewery to the Bloomer Brewing Company in 1906. And during this particular period the brewery became a major regional brewery, which it still is today. Now Adam's son Fred J. Bloomer took over the brewery in 1918 following the death of his father, and he was assisted in the management by his brothers Jacob and Adam Jr., and under their guidance the brewery went from producing only 1,500 barrels per year to 12,000, and the brewery was re-equipped and practically rebuilt at this point. Now the Bloomer brothers took over the brewery at the worst possible time, this being because of the onset of the prohibition laws on alcohol throughout the US, and in order to survive the company changed its name to the Bloomer Products Company in 1920, and they started producing ice cream, non-alcoholic beer, and they also distributed farming equipment to the local farmers in the area. Now the prohibition of alcohol in the States failed miserably, and the law was repealed in 1933, and at this point the brewery reintroduced the Bloomer's Golden Glow real beer, which I'm sure you can actually still get today under, they've still got the recipe there. But after 5 difficult years, Fred Bloomer resigned and sold the brewery to Carl O'Marty in 1938, and this guy was a big cheese magnate from Monroe and Milwaukee, and he and his brother Robert were mainly interested in using the brewery for its cold storage for their cheese, and they were actually very prominent in the resorts and nature trail industry within Wisconsin. And it was interesting enough that their cheese factory was located adjacent to the brewery, and it stayed beyond this particular period in the history of the brewery. The cheese factory actually stayed as a brewery building for quite a long time until it was torn down later on. But the Marty brothers named Joseph Huber, who was a German immigrant to the US in 1923. They named him as president of the brewery, and he later became the owner in 1947. And he was a decorated soldier of the German army during the First World War, and he had initially settled in South Dakota before moving back to Wisconsin. And he was known as being very, very popular and active in the local community. And during his tenure, the Huber Bock, which I have for you here, the Huber Regular, the Regal Brau, and the Wisconsin Club beers were introduced. Now, the brewery passed into the hands of Fred Huber upon the death of Joseph in 1977, and he was a great business visionary and is regarded as the reason there's still a brewery in Monroe today. He managed to attract a great amount of investment into the brewery and drove the first exports of the company's beer, and rescued several fledgling beer brands from various defunct breweries in the surrounding area of the US, as well as introducing the Augsburger brand of beer, which is still quite famous today. Now, Fred Huber sold the brewery to Bill Smith and Craig Werle, who were involved at the Pabst Brewery for a long time in 1989. Sorry, I'm jumping back a century. But this was much to the surprise of the local community. But during their tenure, they changed the corporate culture of the brewery greatly and fired the legendary brewmaster Hans Keisler, and they sold the Augsburger brand to the Stroh Brewing Company, and this was kind of devastating for the brewery. It actually reduced the brewery's brewing volume by 60%. But interestingly, Stroh later merged with Pabst and sold the Augsburger brand is still produced by Pabst today. It sounds as if that was a bit of an inside job, to be honest. But in 1989, Fred Huber, the prodigal son, returned to the brewery with partner Hermann Berghoff, and they ran the brewery together until 1994, introducing the Berghoff craft beers and bringing back brewmaster Hans Keisler. Now, in 2006, the brewery was sold to the Weinstein family of Madison, who had been the distributors of the Monroe brewery beer for decades through their company General Beer. Now, the Weinsteins injected considerable money into the brewery to modernise it, and they provided much needed stability after a very turbulent period in the 1890s, as I've just spoke about there. But they introduced various new lines of beer, and they also expanded the Berghoff family of beers. But in 2003, the company started making beers for Ravinder Minhas to export to Canada as export beer, and by 2005 this took up 85% of the brewery's capacity. Now, the Minhas family actually went on to buy a 100% interest in the brewery in October 2006, and this is, as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, this is the Minhas Brewery, Huber Bock. So as you can just see from the long history which I've just gone through with you there, the brewery has been hugely influenced by mainly kind of German, Swiss and French immigrants to the United States. So it has a very, very colourful history, this brewery. I'll put the brewery website into the description of the video for you, so you can go and have a read through it yourself. I cut that history down quite a bit, because obviously I would have been here all day if I'd read out the full thing to you. But anyway, let me just take you through the tasting of this beer now. I'll let you have a little look at the bottle artwork and things like that. So I'll just bring up the camera again and make sure you're seeing that. It's a fairly simple label and things like that. You can see on there it says since 1845 Monroe. I'm not sure if this is the city crest of Monroe in Wisconsin as well. For those of you interested in the bottle cap, as you can see, it's got the goat on it, which I'm sure is the symbol of the Minhas Brewery. This beer is apparently imported by World Beers Limited from Hertfordshire in London to the United Kingdom, and it says on it that it's a mellow dark brown beer with hints of coffee and cocoa and robust malt flavours, and enjoyed since 1845. So anyway, let's get this guy open and get it tasted for you here. I'll just preserve my bottle cap as I always do. Pop on one side, and there we go, sorted. Right, so let's get this guy out. Now, this one apparently is a bottom fermented beer, and it uses two-row carapils and black malts, and it uses domestic US hops as well. So it's a 5.5% Bock style beer. So as you can see, if I just hold this up for you, it's pretty much kind of pitch black. If I hold it up to the light, it has a slight ruby tint to it. It's got a kind of thin bubbly head on it. Yeah, it seems to be kind of dissipating quite quickly, so I guess that will probably go to a kind of, yeah, it's starting to go to a thin film just now. As you can see, in terms of the aroma of this beer, the first thing that comes is the roasted malts. That comes right away, but very prominent in the aroma. There's some kind of hints of sort of cocoa and dark chocolate, as you would expect from the description on the bottle itself, I would say. But yeah, there's some hints of caramel and brown sugar in the thing as well. A little bit of hop notes, but it's actually quite a strong aroma without any particular element being too pungent. I mean, the most prominent thing there is it has to be the roasted malts and stuff, I would say. But let's just give this guy a taste and see what he's like. First, yeah, as with the smell, the first thing that comes to you is the roasted malt there. Yeah, the roasted malt comes to you first with that element of kind of coffee, chocolate flavours, I would say. You can taste that little bit of hops in it as well, but they're not very strong. They kind of come right after you swallow it. But it's actually kind of, it's a very well balanced beer actually. There's nothing that's too prominent in this. As I say, the first thing that comes to you is the roast malts. The coffee, chocolatey flavour comes to you on the aftertaste. But there's a nice little hint of sort of slightly spiced hops in there as well. But yeah, very, like I say, the roasted malts come first with the flavour of the kind of coffee and things like that. And you do get that little caramel element in there, I should add as well. I'm actually getting the taste of that. But it's you get some hop notes. You get a little bit of spice on it as well. It's actually a very, very well balanced flavour, this one, I have to say. I quite like this one, I do say. In terms of the mouth, I would say it's quite medium bodied. In terms of some of the other Bocks that I've done more recently, this flavour, to be honest, is actually a bit more mild. It's more of an all-rounder than trying to be a more prominent beer. It's nice, I have to say. In terms of the mouthfeel, like I say, it's medium bodied. The carbonation makes it quite crisp actually, which is kind of unusual for a Bock. Usually I find Bocks to be very kind of filling and stuff and more flavourful. But it has a little bit of a creamy texture to it, not as much as some of the other ones that I've done recently. This one, the creaminess is very, very mild, I would say, but the carbonation makes it quite crisp, and it's quite drinkable actually. It's not as thick as some other Bocks that you might find around. But anyway, this beer, I would say, is quite good for... I'd maybe try this beer with it's maybe a dessert beer, I would say, to be honest. If you're wanting to match it with food, I would go for a dessert beer. It's nice, and I mean, I got this for quite cheap, so I would recommend that if you get the chance, you try it. Beer's always subjective, so I mean, I might say something's really, really good, and then you might try it and really not like it at all. So I mean, this beer's quite cheap. I would recommend you give it a try, and you always decide for yourself. I mean, I can describe the flavours and stuff for you and give you a bit of an idea, but you never know until you try these things yourself. But anyway, thanks again for watching my beer reviews, and if you've enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and share my videos, and I'll be back tomorrow. My next beer review will be an African beer for my 50th beer review. There's not many of these around, so I thought I would save the African beer, for a kind of landmark video, if you like. So tomorrow will be my 50th video. But again, please like, subscribe, share the videos. Let me know your own thoughts on this particular beer, and also you're free to recommend beers to me to review, particularly US craft beers, because we've only got a limited array of these that we can get in Scotland. So if you recommend these to me, I can certainly look into to getting them over here and making review videos for them. So please let me know about that. But thanks again for watching, and I shall be back tomorrow with my African beer review. Cheers.